May 1945. Southern Germany. The Reich is gone, but the paperwork is just beginning. Across Europe, the war has killed roughly 60 million people. Entire cities are flattened, borders are scrambled, and tens of millions are on the move. Refugees, prisoners, forced laborers, orphaned children, soldiers walking home with no home left to walk to. In that chaos, one question matters more than any confession. What's your name on paper? Because after 1945, the men who wore SS runes don't all end up in a cell or a grave. Some end up behind desks. Some end up in uniforms again. Some end up as consultants, technicians, clerks, interpreters, drivers, security men, or intelligence assets. How? Why did so many of them land new jobs, quietly, when the world had just watched what that system did? What you're about to discover explains how a modern bureaucracy can absorb criminals without even noticing it's doing it, and how the early Cold War turned justice into a negotiation. But first, you need to understand what the end of the war actually looked like on the ground. April and May. Cartel 1945 isn't an orderly collapse, it's a continent-wide blackout of authority. Rail lines are severed, police forces dissolve, local offices burn their files, people loot warehouses not for luxury, but for calories. And every road is full, columns of surrendering troops, displaced persons, liberated camp survivors, civilians fleeing fighting, civilians fleeing revenge, civilians fleeing hunger. In that environment, identity becomes a weapon. If you are an ex-SS man, your problem is not philosophical, it's practical. Someone, somewhere, is going to ask a simple question. What did you do? And the wrong answer is a death sentence by a court, by a mob, or by a former prisoner who recognizes your face. So the first move isn't heroics, it's subtraction. Lose the uniform, lose the documents, lose the rank, lose the witnesses. For many, it starts with a razor blade and a mirror. Waffen SS blood group tattoos on the arm get cut out, burned off, covered, or crudely scarred. Distinctive SS paperwork disappears. Dog tags get swapped. In the rubble of a defeated state, the black market isn't just cigarettes and chocolate. It's names. It's stamps. It's blank forms. It's a friendly clerk who knows where the old municipal seals are kept. And here's the catch. The Allies are trying to do three impossible things at the same time. 1. Feed and stabilize a shattered population. 2. Demobilize and process millions of soldiers and prisoners. 3. Identify and punish perpetrators inside a system that was designed to hide responsibility behind procedures. That means triage. And triage always has blind spots. In theory, denazification is straightforward. Sort the population. Categorize the guilty, remove them from power, prosecute major criminals, rebuild Germany and Austria without the people who built the dictatorship. In practice, denazification becomes a paperwork factory drowning in its own output, questionnaires, witness statements, hearings, appeals, reclassifications, and in every step, the system relies on something that war has just destroyed. Records. So now zoom out. If you are a lower-level SS man trying to get a new job in 1946 or 1947, you don't need to defeat an army. You need to pass a bureaucratic checkpoint. You need to become boring. You need a story that fits the appetite of exhausted officials who have 1,000 files on their desks and a political mandate to move forward. This is where most people picture a single secret organization, some cinematic SS underground with codes and assassins. The reality is uglier and more ordinary. It's not one master plan. It's a stack of incentives, a broken labor market, a Cold War that starts immediately, a state that needs experienced administrators, a public that wants stability more than trials, and a quiet social agreement that says, we can't punish everyone, so we'll punish some, and the rest will dissolve into normal life. Compare that to what justice requires. Justice requires time. It requires investigators. It requires evidence. It requires witnesses who are willing to testify. It requires governments that will prioritize trials over rebuilding, and it requires a population that will keep pulling old crimes into the light, even while trying to survive the present. That's a lot to ask in a continent where the present is hunger. So how did ex-SS men actually land new jobs? It happens through a handful of repeatable pathways. 1. The identity rewrite. 2. The administrative loophole. 3. The labor shortage. 4. The political pivot. 5. The intelligence bargain. And every pathway is built on the same foundation, plausible deniability, because the post-war world doesn't just want to know what you did, it wants to know what it can prove you did. And those are not the same thing. Start with the identity rewrite, because it's the simplest. The SS was massive, but it was also fragmented. Some men served in combat formations, some served as guards, some served in offices, some served in police units, some served in camps, some served in logistics, some served in units tied to atrocities, some were directly involved. After 1945, many of them don't say, "I was SS." They say, "I was conscripted late." They say, "I was in the army." They say, "I was a clerk." They say, "I drove a truck." They say, "I guarded a warehouse." They say, "I never joined the party." And then they build supporting evidence the way a con artist builds a stage set. A coworker signs a statement. A priest says he was always a good man. A neighbor says he never talked politics. A local official, often someone who also served under the old regime, confirms the story because confirming it keeps the town functioning. These certificates become a kind of moral detergent, a paper that cleans you. And once you have that paper, you're no longer a problem. You're a candidate. Now zoom out again and look at the labor market. Germany and Austria after the war are not modern job markets with HR departments doing background checks. They are desperate systems trying to restart trains, reopen schools, restore electricity, rebuild police, manage ration cards, administer property disputes, and run factories that are half rubble. Experience matters more than purity. If you've run an office before, you can run an office again. If you've managed men before, you can manage men again. If you've handled logistics, you can handle logistics again. And that changes everything. Because an SS man who knows how to fill out forms, file reports, manage supply, and operate within hierarchy looks very useful to a state that is trying to stand up on broken legs. So the administrative loophole becomes the second pathway. Denazification categories exist, but categories get negotiated. Not everyone gets the same scrutiny. The biggest names get attention, the most visible criminals get attention, but the mid-level and lower-level men can slip into gray zones, especially if the paperwork is incomplete. Witnesses are gone, and the local economy is screaming for workers. And there's another catch. The people administering denazification are often the only people available. They're not imported saints. They're local staff, local translators, local clerks, local police. And many of them served the old state in some capacity because the old state was the only state. So you get a continuity problem. You are trying to purge a bureaucracy using a bureaucracy. That means the system is vulnerable to what it has always been vulnerable to: favors, selective memory, quiet deals. Let's make it concrete. Imagine a municipal office in 1946. The town needs permits, housing assignments, ration distribution, property records. A man shows up with a story. He was a soldier, he was wounded, he has a wife and children, he needs work. The office head is also under pressure to keep the town from collapsing. The office head knows that if the job isn't filled, people will riot when rations are delayed. So the office head hires him for a temporary role. A month becomes a year becomes a career. And now the man is no longer just an applicant. He's embedded. If he's removed later, the office loses its institutional memory. So people defend him, not because they love him, but because losing him hurts them now. That's the third pathway. The labor shortage becomes a shield. But the most powerful pathway is the political pivot. Because by the late 1940s, the question is no longer only how do we punish Nazis? It becomes how do we build a stable West German state facing the Soviet bloc? Once that happens, priorities reorder. A society can only focus on so many existential tasks at once. And the Cold War is an existential task. Security services need staff. Police need staff. Border forces need staff. Intelligence agencies need informants. And the people with the most immediate knowledge of Nazi network, men who already worked in violent systems. So here's the uncomfortable moral dilemma. Do you build a new security state with clean hands and no experience, risking collapse and infiltration? Or do you build it fast, with experienced hands accepting that some of those hands are stained? There is no clean option. And that's exactly why ex-SS men found new jobs. Not because the world forgot, because the world decided what it could live with. Now add the intelligence bargain, because this is where the quiet part becomes structural. An ex-SS officer doesn't always need to be cleared in public. He can be useful in private. He can be protected as a source, a specialist, or a middleman who can deliver other men. And once an intelligence service invests in someone, it doesn't want that investment exposed. Exposure doesn't just embarrass the agency, it burns sources. It triggers political scandal, it undermines public trust, so secrecy becomes its own protection. And then the man's employment history becomes vague on purpose, not a lie that can be disproved. A fog that discourages questions. This is where the post-war world creates a new kind of anonymity. Not hiding in a forest, hiding in an office, hiding in a file stamped confidential. So what did this look like in practice? It looked like ex-SS and other Nazi-affiliated personnel showing up in new institutions under new labels. It looked like civil servant reinstatement policies that brought back thousands of experienced administrators because the state needed them to function. It looked like police forces in the 1950s and 1960s staffed by men who had served in wartime security units, because training a new force from scratch takes years and the streets are already unstable. It looked like industrial firms preferring managers with proven organizational skills, especially when factories are being rebuilt and production targets are aggressive. It looked like a society where asking, "What did you do in the war?" is seen as reopening a wound that everyone is trying to cover with bandages. And it looked like a legal reality that often favored reintegration. Trials are expensive, evidence is hard, witnesses are traumatized or scattered, documents are destroyed, and the burden of proof is not a feeling, it's a standard. So a large number of men slide into ordinary life not because anyone declared them innocent, but because no one could sustain the effort to keep pursuing them. Now, some cases are extreme. Some men did not just blend in. Some were actively protected for a period, recruited, moved, or helped to escape prosecution. And those cases matter because they reveal the mechanism in high definition. When a government or service decides a man is useful, the normal legal process can be delayed, redirected, or quietly undermined. Even temporary protection can be enough. Because the post-war moment is a brief window where records are fluid and borders are permeable. A few months can mean the difference between a trial and a new identity overseas. But here's the part people miss. Most of the reintegration story isn't dramatic escape. It's normal paperwork. It's appeals boards and reclassification hearings. It's local employers ignoring rumors because the applicant can do the job. It's colleagues choosing silence because they also have complicated pasts. It's a national narrative that shifts from purge to rebuild. And that narrative shift is measurable. As years pass, the public appetite for wide denazification declines while the need for stability rises. Families want normal life. Politicians want economic recovery. Allies want a strong West aligned against Moscow. So the space for quiet reintegration expands. That's the difference. And once you understand that, the title stops sounding like a conspiracy and starts sounding like a system. After 1945, ex-SS officers didn't all get away with it in the same way. Some were prosecuted, some were executed, some served sentences, some were hunted for decades. But many found paths into new jobs because the post-war order contained built-in compromises. A shattered continent created administrative blind spots. A labor shortage rewarded experience. A Cold War rewarded information. And a bureaucracy rewarded paperwork over truth. Now zoom out to the personal level because that's where the quietness becomes terrifying. Imagine living in a town where the new building inspector is the same man who once wore SS insignia. Imagine standing in a government office and realizing the official behind the desk speaks with the same clipped confidence you remember from the camps. Imagine reading a newspaper about a respected civil servant and recognizing the face from a different life. That's not a thriller twist. That's how societies metabolize trauma, by burying it inside normality. So why did it happen? Because after 1945, there was no single moment where the world chose justice or forgiveness. There were thousands of small decisions made under pressure. A hiring choice, a reclassification, a missing file, a witness who couldn't face court again, an investigator reassigned, a politician arguing that stability matters more than revenge, a security officer deciding a source is too valuable to lose. And each decision is defensible in isolation. That's what makes the outcome so dangerous, because a system can produce moral catastrophe without requiring anyone to announce out loud that they are choosing it. Now we can answer the question how, in plain terms. Ex-SS officers quietly landed new jobs by doing three things. They reduced their visibility. They exploited the administrative overload of denazification. And they benefited from a political environment that rapidly shifted from punishment to utility. They became ordinary at the exact moment when everyone wanted ordinary to return. And the institutions rebuilding Europe often preferred competence, silence, and forward motion over a prolonged confrontation with the past. So here's the question I want you to carry to the end. If you were in charge in 1946, staring at hunger, chaos, and a new superpower conflict, what would you prioritize? Maximum justice, even if it slows rebuilding and creates instability? Or maximum stability, even if it means some perpetrators disappear into respectable life? By the end, you'll understand why so many governments drifted toward the second option without ever admitting that's what they were doing. And you'll see how that drift reshaped post-war Europe for decades. Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe if you want real history, systems, incentives, consequences, not myths. Thanks for watching.